I think you've got to try and do a sort of a deep dive or an analysis into your best performances and try and understand your strengths when you've done well. Do a deep dive into your dismissals or sort of the areas that you struggle and see what trends there are as well. And that's your starting point. That's how you can really start to understand what you're good at and what you're vulnerable, where you're vulnerable and what you need to keep working on. Can you please provide something like a blueprint for making your game plan as batsman that includes writing your strengths, weaknesses, like the one you made for mental health? So for me, Vibhav, I think you've got to try and do a sort of a deep dive or an analysis into your best performances and try and understand your strengths when you've done well. And then also do a deep dive into your dismissals or sort of the areas that you struggle and see what trends there are as well. And that's your starting point. That's how you can really start to understand what you're good at and what you're vulnerable, where you're vulnerable and what you need to keep working on. So in terms of a blueprint, well, we can potentially put together like a 1-page or a 2-page document. That's maybe something we'll work on. But for now, I would just, for me, when I was young and I was an aspiring cricketer, something I used to do is keep a cricket sort of diary or a journal. And in that, I'd sort of write the date, who we were playing, how many runs I scored. I'd often draw a pitch map. I'd draw like an oval. I'd draw a little pitch in the middle. And then I'd just remember, and I often would forget some runs. Say I made a few runs, I might not remember them all, but I'd draw out where I scored my runs and where I got 4, where I got 3, where I got 2s, etc. And I found that doing that gave me a good understanding of what my strengths were. And then I'd also write down, how I was getting out. And I'd say left arm over LBW, right arm over caught behind, out swing or something. And then over time, I'd look at all that information and I'd be able to understand what's going on in my game. I'd be able to get a trend or a theme in my game. So to me, that's the first thing, and it's very individual. I can't sit there and say your strengths are this, your strengths are that, because you are the only one that knows your game as well as you do. So I could in a one-on-one coaching call, I would guide players through a set of questions, but ultimately it's just about trying to pick apart and find trends in your game play. And you can think about your net play. When you're really playing at your best, you're feeling in control, when you're really on top of your game, where do you hit the ball? It's obviously not where you score in the net, but where do you hit the ball? What balls do you enjoy and what balls do you sort of feel vulnerable with? So for me, I've always enjoyed the ball sort of 5th stump, 6th stump and full, and because I enjoy cover driving. I've got a tendency to sort of fall over a bit. So when it's outside off, that's where my weight's going. I'm pretty strong there. But for me, I know that because of my head falling over, it causes me to often get LBW if the ball's straight. So I'm often working on keeping my head nice and still, and it's something a lot of players have to work on. But I know that if I can keep my head still, I'm less likely to get LBW, but I can still play that cover drive, which is a strength of mine. So, mate, happy to chat more about that. And we'll, as I said, we'll look at putting something together, like a 1-page resource. But for now, I would just say try and get a diary, a blank diary, a journal, whatever you want to call it, and just write out as many things as you possibly can. I love the story Mike Hussey shared on a podcast where he said that when he was young, he did exactly that. When he had some success, when he did well, he would write out as many things as he possibly could. He'd write out what he had for dinner the night before, how many hours he slept, where he scored his runs, what he did for his warm-ups, etc., etc. He'd write out as many things as he could, and then he'd put that piece of paper in his top drawer. And then it might be another few weeks or another month or two till he had some more success. And then when he did, he would write out all those things again. And then after he'd had 4 or 5 innings where he'd done really good, he'd put them all together. I think he got a highlighter, and he would just highlight, when I have 8 hours sleep, or when I go to bed at 9 o'clock, I do well. When I get to the ground early and hit before warm-ups, I do well. He would find trends in his game, and then he could create those behaviours. And that doesn't mean he's always going to have success, but it would give himself the best chance. So that's what I would suggest when you're trying to build your game around your strengths. Look for trends when you've done well, and then also to understand your weaknesses, look for trends of how you get out or where you're vulnerable. And I love what Daryl Mitchell said on our podcast, which we published last week, New Zealand All-Rounder, where he said he made the choice when he was a bit older, he was in his 20s, to really try and stick to his strengths and build his game around his strengths while working out how to just deal with his weaknesses. He wasn't trying to become the complete player that could play everything and be good against everyone and score everywhere. He just thought, okay, what am I really good at, and how do I become even better at that and build my game around that? And how do I then just be able to deal with those weaknesses and just negate them? So that's a really good point, I think. So mate, I hope that helps. I hope that, I hope that gives you something to go away and work on, mate.